Warpugs. So today we're going to be checking out a little bit of the Templin Institute. This was requested by Ronnie in the Discord. If you want me to check out something, just jump onto the Discord, put your request in there. I'm trying to figure out something to do for, normal. I know the comment section, things like that. I might have to start doing things there too. We'll find out. But if you want something seen, no matter what, go to the Discord, put it in the Request for React channels, and we now have a war between the cats. Oh my god, guys. So, Celestine has been coming out more and more. It took her a while to get used to everything. It really did take her a while to get used to everything, but now that she's out and about, I'm really happy for her. She's a fat cat, though. She is a fat cat. And she just wandered off. She hissed at another cat and then wandered off. It is the nature of the beast. Guys, the Liberty Defense Perimeter from the franchise of Resistance. This is, like I said, from the Templin Institute. I believe I said that. I might not have, but I'm an idiot regardless. Guys, there are several franchises that are just interesting to me from a whole host of different reasons. But anytime I think about the possibility of, extraterrestrial anything, Resistance is how I see things kind of breaking down in so many ways. Meaning, when something comes, we have next to no chance and we're doing everything we can to survive. So many movies just get this wrong in my estimate, and one of the ones that got it mostly right until I'd say about halfway through the movie, where the hook came in, was Skyline. And when that hook came in for that movie, I would recommend watching that movie until about the midpoint, and you'll know when to turn it off. Because when the hook of that movie came through for me, I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief, shock, dismay, and I almost wanted to cry because it had been such a good movie up until that point for me. Because we didn't have a chance. And then we found out what the aliens were there for. And then I wanted to scream into the endless void. Warpugs, I've rambled on enough. Liberty Defense Perimeter from the Templin Institute. Subscribe to me, subscribe to them. Let's get into this. I love their opener here.
The hope that the Chimera might have disregarded the North American continent and been satisfied with the rest of the world was one of the last desperate gambles of the United States. It reflected the delusional attitudes of the Noah Grace administration, which for the first critical years of the Chimeran invasion had willfully ignored the slaughter of mankind in Europe and kept its own population unaware of the growing disasters abroad. When the first spire attacks hit New England in 1951, and tens of thousands of Americans were infected by the Chimeran virus, the absurdity of American foreign policy was revealed and quickly replaced with a last-ditch effort to preserve the human race. It was known as the Liberty Defense Perimeter. Though the United States government was unwilling to undertake any measures on its home soil that might alarm its populace, the inevitability of a Chimera invasion on the continent was discussed as early as 1950. By analyzing the collapse of the European defense efforts, the destruction of the Royal Navy, and the accelerating advance of the Chimera across Asia and Africa, the Joint Army and Navy Board began developing contingencies to repulse a hypothetical invasion. 3 likely scenarios were discussed, codenamed Yukon Thrust, Continental Pincer, and Heartland Defense. Through various war games and analysis, it was determined that the whole of the United States could not be successfully defended.
True.
Only a consolidated perimeter, behind which American industry and manpower would be evacuated, had the potential to create a stalemate, and even some kind of armistice. If this were not forthcoming, then this new American rump state could exist in perpetuity, and create a bastion from which this eventual counterattack might be launched. The Liberty Defense Perimeter was therefore envisioned as a 4,500-mile boundary, extending from Idaho and Arizona in the west to Alabama and Ohio in the east. It was nearly entirely landlocked, with only a small coastal area preserved in Mississippi and Louisiana.
For oil.
Much of the perimeter was deliberately set back a minimum of 300 miles from the coasts and the borders of Canada and Mexico, which could not be effectively defended. This reduced American state would be unable to sustain the total population of the country, and great care was taken to determine which citizens would be allowed to evacuate within the perimeter. Priority was given to essential government personnel, the office of the president, the members of Congress, and their immediate families.
Of course.
Industrialists, scientists, and influential private citizens would follow. And finally, the soldiers, workers, and farmers needed to preserve the perimeter and the populace within it. The perimeter's primary defenses were a network of artillery platforms, towers 1,400 feet tall and equipped with a single 90mm naval cannon and 4 44mm anti-aircraft guns.
Okay.
Their effective range was rated at 50 miles through the employment of sophisticated radar and other targeting systems. The towers were to be placed every 50 feet as local terrain allowed, for a total of 38,780 artillery emplacements. These towers, however, represented only part of the perimeter's defensive measures. Mobile Strategic Reserve Forces were to be stationed throughout the interior zone, reacting to wherever the Chimera seemed poised to breach the static line. Additionally, a secret provision within the Liberty Plans suggested using chemical weapons to completely eradicate Americans outside the zone who were not to be evacuated.
This particular scenario is untold amounts of hell. This is nightmare fuel, but you gotta love it.
This was to be aided by poisoned supplies delivered by the air under the guise of a relief operation. These harsh measures, it was believed, would deprive the Chimera of the biological material they required to reproduce. With the Chimeran invasion of the United States no longer hypothetical, construction of the Liberty Defense Perimeter was approved on September 3rd, 1951, immediately after the New England attack. It was completed by August of the following year, though surviving materials provide evidence that the initial plan might have been significantly altered and likely downscaled in the intervening time.
Doubtlessly.
On May 15th, 1953, the long-awaited attack on the United States occurred, with Chimeran air fleets arriving simultaneously over the east and west coasts. Their advance was more rapid than even the most pessimistic projections, and over 60% of the US armed forces were destroyed in the first 72 hours. The Liberty Defense Perimeter was breached less than 2 weeks later, on May 28th, by a Chimeran thrust from the south. Within a single day, roughly 75 million Americans had been infected. Less than 4% of the country's pre-war population survived, scattered across its former territories. Despite local successes that inflicted heavy damage upon the Chimeran fleet, the Liberty Defense Perimeter ultimately failed in its objective.
You think?
It was constructed out of desperation and only completed when the war had already been lost across the rest of the world.
I'd say that would be something that we wouldn't do, that we take every precaution, but we've seen things like this before. Not to this scale, but we've seen stuff like this before where you should have known this was going to happen. Every indication was that this was going to happen. You did nothing, and now we're here. I mean, not necessarily in a scale such as this, but we've seen it economically, we've seen it population-wise, we've seen it with jobs, we've seen it all over the place. So why wouldn't they just lean on a hope and just pray that the problem would go away?
In whatever manner mankind survives today, the decaying ruins of its towers prove the truth behind the words of one of America's most famous generals, that fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man.
In Atlas, the Templin Institute investigates the most storied places from across alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video,
the absolute insanity that resistance would be, like, I don't even know what you would say about this in the long run. I don't even know what you'd say about this. Humanity losing so badly in so many ways due to its own, its own biases toward each other. Like when the Russians fell, when Europe started to go, had to go to war against this invading entity. And lastly, the isolationist attitudes of the Americans that eventually led to the downfall of everything. Warpugs, I'd like to know a little bit more about resistance, to be honest with you, because there's so much here that I like. It is the worst aspects and the greater demons of our nature all manifesting at the same time. There's not much else to say about this, Warpugs. Resistance is just one of those franchises where everything goes wrong. And you have to love things like that. As a person who enjoys sci-fi, I enjoy more... There's a reason why The Expanse is one of my favorite things out of sci-fi. There is no big moment where everybody just decides to get along for the greater good of all mankind. There's no moment like that. There's always people with ulterior motives. There's always people trying to get it inside up. Even at the end, where the best guy, like the guy that has the biggest moral code out of everybody, he had a reason for doing what he was doing. Warpugs, I like, and this should have been obvious to anybody who has spent 5 seconds on this channel with me, I like stories where it's really, really going to be hard to see how we come out ahead. 40K, SCP, I love them all. I'm gonna head out from here. Check all the links in the description below. Join as a member or join as a Patreon. I will catch you guys next time. And just build the turrets, please. I don't want to be finding myself face to face with the Chimera. Just saying.